The night doesn't care who you are. It does not care about your name, your power, the empire you built with blood and silence and 15 years of never once blinking first. The night just swallows you whole. And on a rain-hammered street in Accra, Ghana, one of the most feared men in Seoul's underworld was bleeding out in the back of a car. And the only person on earth who could save him was the woman he had thrown away like she was nothing. Like she had never mattered. Like love was a transaction he could simply reverse. Her name was Ziva. And his name, the name that made grown men lower their eyes in Seoul's underground, was Ronin. This is not a story about a powerful man. This is a story about what happens when a powerful man destroys the most real thing he ever had, and then has the audacity to need it back. She did not know he was coming. Nobody warned her. Nobody could have. Draven had driven through the night with a dying man in his back seat, and a single destination burned into his mind. Because in the entire world, with all of Ronin's money, and all of his connections, and all of the people who had sworn loyalty to him, there was only one person Draven trusted with this. Only one person he knew would not let Ronin die out of spite. Only one person who had ever loved Ronin past the mask. The irony of it could have broken a lesser man. Ziva was 3 hours into a double shift when the call came through to the emergency bay. Gunshot wound. Critical. ETA 4 minutes. She dried her hands. She straightened her shoulders. She walked toward the trauma bay the way she walked toward every crisis, like the ground beneath her feet belonged to her. She had no idea that the crisis walking through her doors tonight had her name tattooed somewhere in the wreckage of its chest. Stay with me, because what I am about to tell you did not begin in that hospital. It began 3 years ago, in Seoul, in a life that felt like a dream before it became a lesson. And you need to understand all of it, every beautiful, devastating piece of it, before you can understand what Ziva did next. Ziva Mensah did not come to Seoul looking for love. She came for a fellowship, a 2-year surgical training program at one of Seoul's most advanced medical institutions, a program she had applied for 4 times before they finally had the sense to accept her. She was brilliant. She was driven. She was a full-figured Ghanaian woman in a city that had never seen anyone quite like her. And she walked through every corridor of that hospital like she had personally designed the floor plan. She did not shrink. She never learned how. That was the first thing Ronin noticed. He was not supposed to be at that hospital that night. A man in his business used private medical facilities, quiet places with no cameras and doctors who understood that some wounds came with questions better left unasked. But one of his men had been brought to the public hospital in a panic, and Ronin had come personally, because that was the kind of boss he was. He took care of his own. Always. He was in the corridor, speaking in low tones to Draven, when Ziva came around the corner at full speed, a chart in one hand, a coffee in the other. Zero apology on her face for the space she occupied. She nearly walked straight into him. She looked up, assessed him in 1 second the way surgeons assess everything, quickly, completely, without flinching. Then she said, "Excuse me," moved around him and kept walking. Ronin stood in that corridor for 3 full seconds after she passed. Draven said nothing, but he noticed. He always noticed. It took Ronin 2 weeks to find a reason to return to that hospital. It took him another week to find a reason to speak to her. It took Ziva 4 conversations to decide he was interesting, and 1 more to decide he was dangerous. And she had never in her life been able to resist something that was both. They did not fall in love the way people do in stories. They fell in love the way people do in real life, slowly and then suddenly, in between ordinary moments, over terrible coffee and late-night conversations, and the specific kind of silence that only exists between 2 people who have stopped needing to perform for each other. Ronin never told her everything about what he was, but Ziva was a surgeon. She understood that some things exist beneath the surface where no scan can reach them, and she made the decision that she loved the man she could see, and she would trust the rest to time. That was her first mistake. Not because she was naive. Ziva was the least naive woman in any room she entered. But because she trusted that love, real love, the kind you build in silence and coffee and 3 a.m. honesty, she trusted that it would be enough. She did not account for Director Kang. Nobody ever accounted for Director Kang until it was too late. He was the kind of man who existed in the architecture of power rather than its visible face. You never saw Kang at the front of anything. He preferred the foundations. Foundations were where the real control lived. He had built Ronin from nothing, pulled him out of the wreckage of a broken family at 19 years old, and turned him into something precise and lethal and absolutely loyal. And for 15 years, that arrangement had been perfect. Then Ziva arrived, and Kang watched Ronin change in the small ways that only someone who has studied a person for 15 years would notice. The way he checked his phone differently, the way his jaw lost some of its permanent tension, the way he laughed once, actually laughed, in a meeting. Kang did not see love when he looked at that. He saw a liability. He saw a crack in a wall he had spent 15 years building. And Director Kang did not patch cracks. He demolished the entire wall and built a stronger one. The meeting happened on a Tuesday. Kang called Ronin into his office, the one on the 43rd floor that looked out over Seoul like it was something Kang personally owned. And he sat across the desk with his hands folded and his expression perfectly, terrifyingly calm. He told Ronin about a strategic alliance, a marriage into the Park family, one of the 3 remaining bloodline syndicates in Seoul, a merger that would double their reach and eliminate 2 rivals without a single act of violence. The bride had already been selected. The date had already been set. All that remained was for Ronin to end whatever it was he had going on with the African woman. Quietly, cleanly, permanently. Ronin sat very still. This is the moment you need to understand. Because in that silence, in the 4 seconds between Kang finishing his sentence and Ronin responding, a man made the choice that would define the next 3 years of 2 people's lives. Ronin thought about Ziva. He thought about the way she said his name, like it was just a name and not a title. The way she challenged him without theater. The way she had looked at him once, in the dark, like she had seen the part of him he kept buried and decided it was worth staying for. He thought about all of that. And then he looked at Kang, at the man who had made him, who controlled everything around him, who was watching him with eyes like polished stone. And he made the calculation that men like him are trained from birth to make. He chose survival over love. He told himself it was protection, that walking away kept Ziva safe from a world she had no business being inside. He told himself a lot of things in that office, and if he told them to himself with enough force, he almost believed them. He ended it 3 days later. No long conversation, no explanation, no honesty. He met her at the restaurant where they had spent their first real evening together, the small place near Hongdae that smelled like garlic and old wood, and he sat across from her and told her it was over, that it had run its course, that she should go back to Ghana when her fellowship ended and build the life she was always meant to build. Ziva went very still. She had the particular stillness of someone whose mind is working at a speed their body refuses to match. She looked at him for a long time. Then she asked him one question. She asked him if any of it had been real. And Ronin, the man who had built an empire on the foundation of never showing what was happening inside him, looked her in the eye and told her no. He told her no. And Ziva Mensah, who had never learned to shrink, who had walked through every corridor of her life like the floor belonged to her, sat across from the man she loved and felt something in her chest go completely and terrifyingly quiet. She did not cry in front of him. she would not give him that. She stood up. She picked up her bag. She walked out of that restaurant with her back straight and her head high and her face composed. And she did not look back. Not once. If you have ever been the one who loved more, drop your city in the comments right now, because this story was written for you. She went back to Ghana 4 months later when her fellowship ended. She did not go back broken. She went back burning. There is a specific kind of fire that gets lit inside a woman when the person who was supposed to see her value looked right at it and chose something else. It does not destroy her. It refines her. Ziva channeled every single piece of what Ronin had done into the only language she had ever fully trusted. Medicine. She took a position at a private hospital in Accra. Within 8 months, she was heading her department. Within 18, she had pioneered a trauma surgery protocol that reduced post-operative mortality in her unit by 31%. She built a life that was so full, so deliberately and magnificently full, that there were entire days, sometimes entire weeks, when Ronin was nothing more than a lesson she had learned and filed away. But nights are different from days. Nights have a way of finding the things you have filed away and pulling them back out. Her sister Yemi would sit with her on the veranda sometimes, in the warm Accra evenings, and she would look at Ziva in that way she had, that particular sister look that reads everything you are not saying, and she would say nothing. Because Yemi understood that some wounds do not need commentary, they just need witness. Do you think a man like Ronin deserved a second chance? Vote in the poll right now, yes or no, because your answer might change by the end of this story. 2 years passed, and then on a Thursday night in the middle of a double shift, the emergency bay doors opened, and Draven walked in carrying the wreckage of a man. Ronin had been shot twice, once in the shoulder, once dangerously close to his left lung. He had lost significant blood. His blood pressure was dropping. He was running out of time with a specificity that did not care about his empire, or his name, or any of the 15 years he had spent being untouchable. Draven had driven through the night because Kang's men were everywhere in Seoul, because every private facility Ronin had ever used was now compromised, because Draven had gone through every option available to him and arrived at the end of that list at a name Ronin had never stopped saying, not when he was unconscious in Draven's car, not in the fragmented, feverish hours of the drive, even bleeding and broken and beyond his own control. The name that kept surfacing was Ziva. Draven had taken that as his answer. She came through the trauma bay doors and stopped. 1 second, maybe less. Her eyes found his face on the gurney, and something moved through her expression so fast that only someone watching for it would have caught it. Draven caught it. Then it was gone. And in its place was the surgeon. She snapped on her gloves and moved to the gurney, and her voice came out even and clear and completely in command. Vital signs, blood type, time of injury, current medications, allergies, and the team around her responded like the well-trained unit they were, because when Ziva spoke in that voice, the room reorganized itself around her. Draven grabbed her arm as they wheeled Ronin towards the theater. He said her name. She looked at him. Once, steady. He said, "Ziva, you don't have to do this." She looked at him for 1 more second. Then she said, "Yes, I do." And she walked through those doors. The surgery took 4 hours and 17 minutes. 4 hours and 17 minutes in which Ziva Mensah stood over the man who had looked her in the eye and told her that none of it was real. And she used every skill she had, every year of training, every protocol she had pioneered, every steady hand and clear mind she possessed, to keep him alive. Nobody in that theater knew who he was to her. Nobody knew that the hands working to save him were the same hands he had once held in a small restaurant in Hongdae and then walked away from without looking back. Nobody knew any of it. And that was exactly how Ziva needed it, because this was not about him. This was about her, about who she had decided to be when it cost her something. This is the moment you have been waiting for. And I need you to tell someone about this story right now. Share this video before we get to the ending. Because what Ziva does next is something not every person is strong enough to understand alone. He woke up 41 hours later. The room was dim. The monitors beside him beeped with the steady, indifferent patience of machines that do not care about the drama of human lives. They just count heartbeats. Ronin opened his eyes, and she was there. Not because she had been waiting. She had a hospital to run and a department to lead, and she had not rearranged any of it for him. She was there because she had come to check on a patient. That was all. That was the entirety of what he was to her in that building, a patient whose file had her name on it. She was reading his chart when he opened his eyes. He looked at her for a long time before she looked up. When she did, her expression did not change. She said, "Your blood pressure is stabilizing. You lost significant volume, but the transfusions held. The bullet near your lung did not penetrate the pleural cavity. You will need 6 weeks of recovery, minimum." He said nothing. She made a note in the chart. Then he said her name. Just her name, nothing else. Ziva. She paused, just for a moment, barely visible. Then she looked up at him with eyes that were the softest and most dangerous thing in that room, and she said, "You should rest, Ronin." He said, "I told you it wasn't real. In Seoul, I told you none of it was real." She held his gaze. He said, "I lied." The room was very quiet. She put the chart down. She walked to the window. She stood with her back to him for a moment, long enough for both of them to understand that what happened next was her choice and not his request. Then she turned around. She said, "I know you lied, Ronin. I knew it when you said it. I walked out of that restaurant knowing it." He looked at her. She said, "And I saved you anyway. Not for you, for me. Because the day I let what someone did to me determine what I do with my hands is the day I lose the only thing that has ever truly belonged to me." Silence. She picked up the chart. She said, "Kang's men will find you if you stay in Accra. Draven is already working on getting you somewhere safe. When you are strong enough to move, you will move. And you will rebuild your life somewhere that is not my city." She moved toward the door. He said, "Ziva, is that it?" She stopped at the door. The longest pause. She turned back and she looked at him one final time. This man she had loved, this man who had chosen wrong and paid for it in blood, this man lying in a bed that existed because of her hands. And something in her expression shifted. Not soft, not closed. Something in between. Something true. She said, "You were real to me, Ronin, every single day of it, and I will carry that. But I worked too hard to build this life to hand any part of it back to a man who has not yet decided what he wants to be." She said, "When you figure that out, if you figure that out, you know where to find me." And she walked out. Ronin left Accra 11 days later. Kang's operation collapsed 6 weeks after that, taken down not by a rival syndicate, but by a financial investigation that traced 17 years of laundered capital to accounts Ronin had quietly, carefully, and very deliberately documented over the years. The kind of documentation a man creates when he realizes too late that the only insurance worth having is the truth. Kang was arrested on a Wednesday morning. Ronin was in a quiet city watching the news on a small screen when it happened. He thought about Ziva. He thought about what she had said. He thought about the man he had been when he walked away from her and the man he wanted to be now. And for the first time in his life, the distance between those two men felt like something worth crossing rather than something worth hiding. He wrote her a letter. Not a message, not a call. A letter, handwritten, 4 pages. He did not ask for anything in it. He did not make promises. He did not try to rewrite what he had done or dress it in language that made it easier to carry. He told her the truth. All of it. Kang, the meeting, the calculation. The moment in that restaurant when he looked at her and chose wrong. He told her that she had saved his life twice. Once on that table and once a long time ago in a corridor in Seoul, when she had looked at him without flinching and made him remember he was a person and not just a weapon. He said he was not writing to reclaim her. He was writing because she deserved the truth she had never been given. And he was done being a man who withheld things from ZIVA Mensa. She read the letter on her veranda. Yemi sat beside her in silence. When she finished, ZIVA folded it carefully and held it in her lap and looked out at the Accra evening. The warm sky, the sound of the city she had rebuilt herself inside, the life that was entirely and magnificently hers. Yemi said nothing, because Yemi understood. After a long time, ZIVA looked at her sister. She said, "He finally told the truth." Yemi said, "What are you going to do?" ZIVA looked back at the sky. She smiled. Not the composed, professional smile, not the armor smile, the real one, the rare one, the one that belonged only to her. She said, "I'm going to think about it." And for ZIVA Mensa, a woman who never made a single move without full certainty, that was everything. That was the beginning. Some people walk out of your life and take nothing with them, and some people walk out of your life and take something so specific, so irreplaceable, that you spend years learning to breathe around the shape of what's missing. ZIVA knew which kind Ronin was. She had always known. The question was never whether she still loved him. The question was whether love, on its own, was ever enough of a reason. She had saved his life with her hands. He had saved hers with the truth. And maybe, just maybe, that was the trade that made them even. That was the foundation. Not passion, not history, not the beautiful, devastating wreckage of what they used to be. But honesty. Finally, after everything, the kind of start that actually holds. If this story moved you, if ZIVA's strength made you feel something you needed to feel today, then subscribe to this channel right now, because we tell stories here about people who choose themselves first, and we are just getting started. Thank you for watching until the very end. ZIVA chose herself, and then she chose wisely. That is not a small thing. That is everything.